Okay, Melanie and Laura back again.
Hi, guys.
So I am a licensed counselor and coach.
And I am a certified spiritual healer and therapist, massage therapist, also an ordained minister. So I like to dig into people's spiritual side of things, and Melanie brings a lot from the therapy world into that.
It's so funny because you and I have had like very private conversations about the different approaches that we have, and where you come at it more from the spiritual angle. I tend to come at it more from the scientific angle.
Right.
And that kind of being a pattern
Yeah.
for each of us.
Yeah.
And
it's we've done a really good job of, sometimes I get a little woo 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 woo, you know, and sometimes she gets a little really grounded.
A little too in the facts and figures.
We kind of balance each other out because I will bring in some of the faith-based type, okay, open your heart chakra, let's do some breathing, that kind of thing. And then she'll bring in some really practical stuff that kind of pulls me back down out of the stratosphere. And I think as women, we live in both of those worlds.
Absolutely.
And working together, I think we find a pretty good balance between, you know, that part of us that really truly is deeply feeling and caring and all nurturing and smushy, and the part of us that is very cerebral and understands that in order to get our needs met, we can't just be out there going,
right.
That we actually have to have some practicality to what's going on.
Especially if we're in relationship with men, whether that's boss or brother
or son,
partner or whatever it is, because there are differences in the way that the brains are structured.
Right.
And we can't come at them all emotional, or they're going to dismiss it because they don't understand that. We have to have some kind of, you know, cerebral logical something approach that's not based in emotion.
So that we can actually make the connection.
So we can make that connection. So that's a big part of what we're doing with this podcast.
Yeah. Well, and it also helps that Melanie's husband is a men's coach. So she's got kind of an inside track on some of the things that work.
We talk so much about these types of things. And so very often I'm like, well, Dennis says it like this, and I really like that. So I'll bring his thoughts into this as well. Maybe someday we'll actually ask him to sit in on a discussion. But, you know, we'll see.
That'd be a good thing. We did a segment recently on grade divorce.
Yeah.
From that, just in a private conversation, we stumbled upon another piece that probably isn't getting addressed.
I kind of want to tell the story real quick because this is part of what spurred it on. There's this show, and
we're dating ourselves.
Totally dating ourselves, because a lot of my young clients are like, I've never heard of that show. Some of you have heard of it. It's Dharma and Greg. And Dharma's real flighty, you know, type of hippy dippy, right? And Greg is an attorney from a very waspish family. And his parents are Edward and Kitty. And during the run of the show, Edward retires. And Dharma gets him like really excited about another project. So he's spending all his time on this other project. And Kitty is very, very upset with her daughter-in-law Dharma and says, this is not fair. I have waited 30 years. Always putting myself on the back burner. I've waited 30 years for it to be my turn with him, and you have no right to interfere with that. And on one level, it kind of resonated with me, but on the another level, I'm like, ooh, that's a very, unfortunately, very toxic way to look at it.
And a very common theme that leads to grade divorce.
Yeah. You know, putting yourself on that back burner. And thinking, oh, well, when this happens, it will finally be my turn.
Right.
The relationship that you have with your partner is not something that you put on hold, because when you put on hold like that, it won't be there when that time comes.
If you're not doing anything to nurture it, if you're not doing anything to keep those connections, what happens if, let's say you've been the stay-at-home wife, you've been, you've gotten to do your own thing, he goes to the office or the mill or whatever he's doing for 30 years, you get to retirement, You have been holding your breath, waiting for retirement, and you can't connect.
Right.
You can't make that connection because you have spent 30 years putting aside what your wants and needs are. What happens if he comes to you after 30 years and says, we're good, what do you want to do? You might not have any idea.
If he
You
does,
might not.
because you can also look at
Right.
Edward's behavior as possibly being avoidant.
Well, and that was the other direction I was going to flip
sorry.
this. No, you're good. Because it could also be he doesn't know what to do with himself.
Right.
He has so much of a man's identity
Is
and his work and so much of his self-worth and his masculinity is tied up in bringing home the bacon.
They get wrapped up in that identity as provider.
Yes.
And that is only one aspect of healthy masculinity.
And that, again, a man's worth and value as a provider has so little to do with that paycheck that's going in the bank.
I talked to men about it
yeah, go ahead.
As yes, providing for your family is important financially, but there's other things that you provide too that you're ignoring.
Yeah.
You provide emotional stability. You provide a safe, comforting place, whether you realize it or not. You provide emotionally as well, and that is super important. So a lot of guys ignore that piece completely because it gets diminished
in society.
Yeah.
I really think that there have been lots of instances where, especially in couples who are going through divorce, that the focus is on her part. You go into the divorce and the focus is, I want half your money.
Yeah.
Well, what is that telling him? You've only been worth the money.
Right.
You know, it's not, I require you to have half the time with the children.
Right.
We're going to keep the kids away too, and we want half your money.
That's so unfair to the kids.
It's really unfair to the kids, and it's unfair to your partner. But that we're getting a little off topic there. But what happens when retirement hits? And my grandmother used to have a magnet I think she clipped it out of a newspaper. My grandma used to have newspaper clippings all over. She had it taped to her refrigerator, and it said, retirement, half the money, twice the husband. And what do you do with that? What do you do with when
diminishing.
Yes, it is.
That is sad.
Yeah.
It makes
but
me think
that's the generation. That's what was modeled for us.
I see it so pervasive. Any of you who watched Bridgerton will probably recognize this, because when Colin found out that Penelope had built this empire for herself in secret, he said, basically, she can provide for herself. What do you need me for? And my heart broke.
Right.
That may be the most girly thing I've ever said out loud, because that's a piece of me that I have finally found the feminine side, and it's
unfamiliar territory
it's
still, but it feels good. Look at that smile.
It feels so good, but it's unfamiliar territory. Anyway, sorry, I kind of derailed.
No, I think it's
but
good.
Yeah, I mean, men so often identify just in that, and it's societal, and it's just really deep. But some of it is because they have. So some of it is because the drive to provide and protect is innate.
Yes.
In them. And also many men, how do I want to say this, are not wired to emotional response as women are.
Right.
Different parts of the brain are more active, different neurochemicals are more active, and they're not, so it's not something they naturally tune into.
Right. Now, if it's about doing, if you give them a task, they're very task oriented, they're very, if you leave it too vague as far as a need that needs to be met. They're lost. They like the structure, which I think is part of, again, what brings them comfort when they are working. There is a structure. There's an expectation from day to day. Yes.
And there's, honestly, if we're being really honest, there's a little competition.
Absolutely.
And that is something that men thrive on.
Yes.
And I know it sounds like we're speaking all very gendered and very, stereotypical, but this is like scientifically based. It is there. If you want more information on that, go check out Lou Ann Brisendine's work. Amazing stuff.
If those men suddenly have that taken away from them in retirement, they're going to bring it home. They're going to bring home the competitiveness. They're going to bring home that drive to do, and all of a sudden you may have your garden dug up because they decided they wanted a project. How do you manage that? And a lot of times it doesn't get managed. A lot of times it just blows up.
Yeah.
Because you've spent all of these years putting yourself on the back burner, finally waiting, finally, I'm going to be front and center. I'm going to be his project. Have you made yourself a desirable project?
Oh, so I love that point.
Have you made yourself an area he wants to spend time in? Because you may have created such a division, such an alienation with your resentment of, come on, I'm waiting. And now he's retired. He doesn't get a chance to take a breath because you've jumped in.
That also dovetails into the micromanaging that we were talking about before, because, I know I've talked about it before, but the neurochemicals and the hormones that drive men to connection are different, and the mechanisms are different for men than they are for women. And, one of the things that makes you, and part of the reason that I'm approaching it from this angle, Dennis and I were having a conversation last night where he was asking for a friend of a friend what I would recommend a woman read when she's successful in work but not so successful in relationship, right? And a big part of it has to do with understanding how connections are made on both sides. So men want to be able to help you and solve a problem, work collaboratively. Okay. If you're too proud to ask him for help opening that jar, that's not going to be actually very attractive. If you're demanding, that's not attractive. That doesn't keep him connected, right? Giving him things, asking for help sometimes, allowing him, not even asking for help, right? Because I can reach the top shelf. It's not as easy with Dennis as it was with my ex who was shorter than I am. But, I'm like, honey, I really need these lowered, but asking for help and him allowing him to help, asking him, what do you think about this? Allowing him to help. But he also is very, very good about not, because I can hear it now, women going, but he's just trying to take over and fix everything and I just want to vent. Yes, but there's a balance to be found, right?
Right.
Learning to allow him to be part of what you're doing and be helpful releases vasopressin, which is the primary bonding hormone for men, as well as responsible for erections. So keep that in mind. Not fully responsible, but partly responsible. It's a big piece of it. So allowing him to take a leadership role. And this is another thing where nuance is really important. So I found in my journey, when I finally found a man who wanted to take that leadership role and be that, We're going to use Rip from Yellowstone as an example. Okay? There's a reason that so many women are fascinated with Rip. He's got that quiet confidence. He allows Beth to be who she is without trying to change her. She doesn't try to change him. And yet, she is this super strong, like, I can't remember exactly what it is that she does. She's not an attorney, but, like, something akin to it with acquisitions or something. But so, like, she works, like, in this high-powered negotiation, legal environment, right? And that is the persona that she puts out to everyone except Rip.
Mm-hmm.
Because she is willing to take a step back and be feminine with him.
She can lean into it safely.
Yeah.
Because he's solid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why women love Rip, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of dynamic that you can help create in your relationship when you play with the masculine, feminine energies. And yeah, so many women are like, I'm never going to have that. That's not who he is. But there are things you can do to kind of help that.
To bring some of that out. Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Okay, I feel like I've derailed, but
no.
It is related.
It falls into what I said. It totally falls into what I said is, have you created an environment in your relationship where he wants you to be his retirement project?
If she was constantly being combative,
right,
with Rip, like eventually he'd be like,
I know a lot of men who dread retirement.
Yeah.
Because that means they have to be home with her.
Yep.
Which is why a lot of men take up golf, or they take up fishing, or they take up whatever else it is that's going to get them out of that scenario, because it's not a safe environment for them.
It might just very well be part of the reason that men died in past generations, like within 5 years of retirement.
Yeah.
Because there's so much conflict and micromanaging.
Yeah. Because I think that as women, if you are a woman that has been in that dynamic of, okay, I'm just gonna suck all this up, I'll put this away, I will put all of this stuff on the back burner, and we will address it all when he retires. That's 30 years of addressing for an individual, a portion of the species who doesn't have the capacity normally anyway to then dump all of that on him, which is also, I think, a big contributing factor why men initiate gray divorce.
Oh, that's interesting. Like, actually, it is the the numbers are the opposite. That may be what you've seen.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to say you're wrong.
No.
But the numbers are the opposite. Women initiate 80% plus of divorces.
I wasn't saying that that's why. I'm saying it could be a factor in why that percentage of men who initiate the gray divorce have initiated the gray divorce. Okay. Because yes, overall, women initiate divorce more than men.
Far more.
Across the demographic, age-wise. More often than not, it's women initiating the divorce than the man. But in that small percentage of men who initiate in gray divorce, I'm saying that it could be a factor in that he's all of a sudden been hit with 30 years of expectation, 30 years of resentment, 30 years of, I want this and I want it right now, and the man doesn't even get a chance to take a breath before she's on him about, let's do all this stuff. You're retired now. It's my turn, and I'm going to jump in there and I'm going to grab it.
Totally fair. The Gottman Institute, which they are really big on in couples research and therapy, they found that the ratio of interactions, positive to negative, in a relationship needs to be 7 positive for every 1 negative, just to kind of wipe the slate clean. Not even to build.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
And so if you wait 30 years and then everything suddenly you expect a big, 180, that doesn't mesh with those numbers either.
That feels pretty destructive. actually.
It feels demanding, which is a negative interaction.
Mm-hmm.
You're emotionally
Petulant.
flooding him,
Mm-hmm.
which is another negative.
Yeah.
And it's not, this suddenly might become his entire world.
Right. And whoa, did he sign up for that?
Right.
Right. And that's got to be kind of scary for a guy.
Yeah.
I think it's got to be scary for anybody, but especially for a man who's used to a certain level of structure, a certain dynamic, and all of a sudden that dynamic shifts not only on a professional level for him, but on a home-based level as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because that secure attachment that he's developed with you, knowing that you're always going to be there, you've suddenly said, okay, I'm done. I'm letting go. I'm stepping into this fun part. Let's go and do.
You know, it's almost like you're just putting everything on him for the success of the relationship.
Right.
And again, what he wants is collaborative work.
Right.
What most men want. I'm not saying every single man. I'm not saying your man.
But in a particular instance, this could be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there's a piece of it of him going from an environment where he has a certain level of competence and feels confident and secure in his ability to achieve goals, and then being dumped into a high demand environment that is not something he's competent in dealing with, and then having to deal with the emotional backlash when he doesn't meet the need or the requirement. Right. So I mean, it is a double-edged triple whammy on this guy.
Yeah.
So he's not only lost that sense of manhood in being the physical provider and the doer of the things. That's been removed now that he's retired. He's also being made to feel additionally incompetent or weak by being forced to then be submerged in her emotional world.
Yeah.
Which probably, because if he had any kind of a very demanding job over 30 years, didn't really spend a whole lot of time getting familiar with her world.
Right.
You know, he may not even know where the freaking blender is, you know?
Right.
You know, I have friends whose mothers pass, and their fathers are calling them, where did mom keep the spoons?
My
did
dad
mom keep the towels?
Was that person. Like, he stopped eating unless my sister came over and made him food.
Yeah, because they are creatures of habit. We are creatures of habit. Human beings are creatures of habit. And if we have created an environment where we have made, you know, his world is work. He works and he provides, and that's his world. And we don't invite him in, or we don't encourage him into our world. When that part of his world closes off to him, this man who had a certain level of confidence and self-assurance is now plunged into an environment where they don't have confidence and they don't have self-assurance, and we're mad at them because they don't have their feet.
Respect is something that is a lot bigger for him in the working world. He receives more respect in the working world, and then when
more acknowledgement.
You know, he's dumped into this, he's not feeling it. And here's the thing.
Right.
Respect is ranked by men as more important than love.
And you can love the heck out of him, but if he's not feeling like you respect him, or he's not receiving the level of respect in retirement as he got while he was working, that's going to build a deficit for him.
And here's the thing, it really blew me away. I read a book that had all these statistics and all these examples and stuff. The way that he perceives respect versus non-respect can be so mind-blowing, because it can be as simple as, that was our turn, versus where's the turn we're supposed to make?
Right. Because it shifts it from you failed to we might be lost.
Right.
It goes from, and it's subtle. It's so subtle because the first, that was our turn, accusatory, blaming. I mean, you may not mean it that way, but that's how they're hearing it.
I literally, when I got with Dennis and I was kind of like I caught myself trying to do the backseat navigation driving thing. I deliberately would make sure that I had something to occupy my hands and my mind in the car so that I didn't do that. Mm-hmm. It was the whole thing.
We're not aware of it. I really think as women, we are not aware of how many times.
How our words hit men.
Right. How they are being translated. And I have this issue with my husband. I love words. Words are deep. They're nuanced. They're flavored. They mean more than they mean sometimes.
Yeah.
Not with my husband. A word is a word. And I will find myself getting upset because he has used a word to just use a word, and I've put all the nuance to it. And so then I find myself all worked up and wrapped up in that, and he's totally lost because he has no idea why I'm thinking these extra thoughts, and why are you going there? Why are you adding this? If you take a man who has been in a work environment in which he has a certain level of respect, he's probably also working with other men who speak a similar language. When we have nuance, let me put this a different way. What sounds like instruction from a woman may land and be perceived as criticism to a man.
Right.
Putting yourself, and I know some women are going to hear this and be like, I'm not playing a role. I'm not going to police what I say. It's not that.
It's about respectful communication, because whether you're talking to a man or a woman, no one wants to feel like they're being accused. No one wants to feel like they are being diminished. No one wants to feel like they are less than through the words that you are using and the tone that you are using.
Right.
And this goes into communication styles.
Yes.
Because remember that there's at least, and I know there's more than this, there are a minimum of 3 parts to the transmission of verbal communication. Okay, we're not even talking about the body language and stuff, but in verbal communication you have the encoding, which is where you're figuring out what you're going to say. You've got the transmission, you've got the reception, and then the decoding.
Right.
4 steps there. Right? Where there could be a miscommunication, misunderstanding. We think of language as being, this is the way to clearly communicate. But your perception and understanding of a word can be nuanced differently than mine.
Right.
We could use the word, I love you, portly.
Yes. I was just going to say that. I was going to use my example.
We could use the word portly, which might mean something a little different to me than to you.
Right.
And I know you have very specific perceptions of that word, and I thought about it, and I'm like, no, I can see how you get there. That's not what my mind does with it.
Right.
But I would never use it in the context it was used.
Right.
With you anyway, because so that means that the person who did use it with you has a third understanding and nuance of that word,
or just in some cases was using a word that they thought was accurate,
and maybe
or
didn't
have the actual real definition, because that happens a lot too, where people use a word and like ambivalent is a big one. Ambivalent doesn't mean I don't care. And there are a lot of people who, when asked, will say, well, I'm ambivalent about it. So
language evolves, changes,
right.
and is not a universal language.
Right. But there are pieces to a way a woman can communicate to a man that
or anyone.
Don't trigger.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just talking about in the specific sense of making a statement that feels respectful to a man versus not respectful to a man.
Right.
If you phrase it in I don't know, it felt like when you said, what exit were we supposed to take?
That I might be kowtowing to
that it's
an ego.
Honey, where were we supposed to go now?
And that might have been the tone that I used.
And there's a piece of that yes is very appealing to a man, and very icky for a woman to want to feel like they're in.
If I may reframe it a little.
No, please do. Okay. Because I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to talk about how we can soften what we say without feeling like we're doing
the airhead roll.
I'm sorry, honey. I don't know what's going on.
So I feel like
Can you be the man? Yeah.
I feel like this goes a little bit into my approach as a therapist, actually.
Okay.
Because my approach is to trigger thinking in that other person, right? And so I'll ask a question that causes them to reflect or bring them out of their reverie, wherever. Or, is that the right word?
A reverie is when you're kind of off thinking.
Okay.
About it. Yeah.
I was like, all of a sudden, I started second guessing myself. I was like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right, isn't it?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So anyway, it's something to kind of bring them back to a little bit of reality and think about it a little differently. And so a lot of my therapy tends to be asking questions for self-reflection.
Yes.
And that's how I look at that question. Not so much I'm being an airhead or, incapable or, dependent, but more of, so what was the exit that we're supposed to be on?
Right.
To get him to kind of go, oh, okay. But that way I'm not saying, dude, you missed the exit.
Because that's what they're going to hear if you say, that was our exit. They're going to hear, hey, asshole, dumbass, look what you did.
So for me, it was more about getting him to think about it himself. And that's what I do with everybody.
Okay.
As opposed to telling them where they fucked up.
Right. And as moms, we have a really hard time sometimes changing our tone with our husband and our child.
Yep.
And there are a lot of men who will bristle at it, but then there are a lot of men that will just allow it because there's a piece of it that, that mothering piece is part of their wounding.
Right.
And then they can then come back and be mad at you for being their mommy. So there's a whole piece of that. But it's what I'm trying to get us to focus on is more about the nuance of the language around what a man hears as disrespectful.
Yep.
Versus trying to communicate in a way that gets our point across without them feeling disrupted or belittled. It could be
as simple as that was the exit versus I think that was the exit.
Okay. Right.
So it doesn't have to be in the form of a question or anything like that. It's just the subtle differences in the wording that you choose can be.
But okay, here's I'm gonna get a little twisty on this.
No, go for it.
That feels disingenuous.
Okay.
And that could be just because as a woman forced to live in her masculine a lot, it doesn't feel right because I'm not comfortable living in my feminine because I'm not in a relationship that supports that.
So
it feels disingenuous. It feels like this is a very good example of becoming aware of when you are approaching your relationship from your masculine versus your feminine. if I were living in my feminine, I would probably not be so triggered by that. I would not be so
real
aware.
time here.
Okay, this is a lot of what happens with Melanie and I too when we're together. Is it just dawned on me that because I am relating to my partner from my masculine and not my feminine, there's an underlying current of what I'm causing that's triggering some of that negative response I'm getting back.
Yeah.
And I didn't think about it. I was not aware that that turn of phrase could hold so much. As important as words are to me, I missed that. I missed that piece of I could say it more gently. Why would I say it more gently? Whoa, that's my masculine. That's my masculine stepping up and saying, I have to lead. He's not leading. I have to lead. But I am never going to encourage him to lead if my masculine is constantly telling him, I got this.
So here's another challenge then. Here's another approach.
There we go.
That can be every bit as feminine.
Okay. I'm in.
Sit on your hands and don't say anything if he misses the turn.
But then we're an hour freaking late somewhere. But yeah, absolutely.
Does it truly matter?
It does not truly matter.
And I have done that. That was my first one that I tried. Because I was like, I don't know what to say. And I literally would sit on my hands to remind myself, don't say anything, don't say it, because he's navigating. I'll let him navigate. I'll let him figure it out. There's a point of pride with a lot of men on navigation.
There is. That whole thing about not asking for directions is a real thing.
That was me not taking over. That was me allowing him to be him, to lead, to get us where we were going.
Or not.
Because, sometimes if you don't get where you're going, you might end up somewhere more fun anyway. And this is, that is a metaphor and a real statement for that scenario. It's almost like you're along for the ride.
Okay.
That was a really hard one for me.
But you have to trust that he's... If you're going to be along for the ride, you have to be with a partner that you trust to get you where you're going.
And like you said, the masculine's about doing, the feminine's about receiving.
Right.
And responding.
Yes.
And so if we're going to stay in our feminine, we have to be good.
And that might be something...
With receiving.
That might actually be an exercise that I will invite, that I myself am going to do. I'm going to invite the rest of you to try this. Is when you are in conflict, or you're feeling like you're in conflict with your partner, or you're just communicating with your partner. What you're saying, if you're going to shift the way that you think, if you're going to respond, think first before you respond, and think about a gentle way to respond versus a negative way to respond, or a harsher way to respond. If that's something that bristles in you, is that because you're coming at it from your masculine again? And that's a topic that I want to pick up at a different time.
Absolutely.
Because I think there's a lot of exploration that can be done about recognizing when you are operating from your masculine, because a lot of us don't recognize when we're doing it. Prime example of what just happened. It's been a journey for me. Like, I will not lie. I operated in my masculine for 25 years of marriage. And then when I found someone who allowed me to be feminine, it was such a scary place to be. Because I'm used to having to call the shots. I'm used to having to protect myself. I'm used to having to have the backup plan on the backup plan. Right.
And the first time we went out of the country together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh God, can I allow him to lead? Can I trust? Can I follow? And it wasn't so much about follow, it was more about trust, which that actually ties into this very well, because it wasn't all about trusting him. There was a lot about trusting myself, right? Should something go wrong, I can figure it out. I don't have to stress about it and worry about it right at this minute, right? I am a capable person. I can figure it out. And trusting myself enough to say, I will figure it out
even if he screws up and something happens, right?
And just kind of like, I felt like I was on a roller coaster with no seatbelt and no brakes. And I knew I had the shoulder thing on,
but it was wiggly.
It was terrifying, because I'm like, I can't see what's coming. It was like Fire in the Hole in Branson and Silver Dollar City. There's this period of where it's dark and you cannot see what turns the roller coaster is going to make. And that's what it felt like. And I was like, okay, I am along for this ride. And he has kept everything safe so far. Nothing bad has happened. And even if something did,
you can handle it.
I'm capable of getting myself home. I'm capable of surviving. I have lived on my own for a little while anyway. I can do this. Right. So some of it was about trusting myself as well as him. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Trusting. Part of it, I think, is trusting the decision to trust him.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Because there's a lot that goes into relationships.
Yeah.
That is about trusting to trust. Trusting the decision. Is it safe for me to trust this person? Because there are lots of instances in our lives where it hasn't been safe to trust somebody.
Right.
So trusting in the decision to trust is huge.
And there's a whole neurochemical and biochemical thing about trust and how trust is built that way. But Dennis asked me one time, he says, how did you know you could trust me?
Right.
Early on, because we met during the pandemic, so there weren't a whole lot of places to go, and we both worked from home, so we were fairly isolated anyway. So like getting together didn't seem like a big deal, right? But there wasn't anywhere to go,
right?
So he's like, "Well, do you want to? Are you comfortable coming over and having lunch?"
Right.
Second date, I was at his house having lunch, and so. It's not something I've shared a lot with a lot of people, because a lot of people are like, including my friend Raven,
dead in his basement,
told me he was going to get me to the basement and kill me. I love you, Raven. But I mean, it's a fair fear, right? But anyway, he asked me how I knew I could trust him, and I pointed out to him that trust is not always an emotion.
Right.
Sometimes it's a decision.
Yeah. So in fact, for women, I think a lot of times it's a decision. For a man, I think it's more of a feeling. I think it's one of those few instances where a man goes into a situation of trust based on his feeling.
Yeah.
Whereas a woman goes into it based on the decision of, I am going to trust this.
Yeah.
Even because, and I think this ties in, because sometimes we have to trust what doesn't feel right. Because of where we're broken.
Because what we would normally trust and feels familiar is broken and not right. And that's why it's not always safe.
And that's a dynamic that men don't necessarily have to address.
Yeah.
Like, men aren't put in situations where they've trusted somebody and been assaulted.
Well, this is why the bear versus the man conversation was so triggering for so many men.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And, I mean, like, who would you rather run into in the woods, a bear or a man? And women
were choosing the bear.
Overwhelmingly chose the bear. And
because
Dennis and I had long conversations
because
about
it's not about the fact that, because the reason we would trust the bear is not because we felt the bear was safer. The bear's reaction was predictable.
Right.
The man's reaction is never predictable. So
Right.
when we are in a position where we have to trust, where we have to choose to trust, it is not just a matter of trusting the person we've chosen to trust, but trusting ourselves that we are choosing to trust the right person.
And I have a thing to go into there too.
Okay.
So, when you are constantly on guard, you are not in your feminine.
Right.
And that was a huge challenge for me, because I'm like, well, how do I keep myself safe?
Right. If you don't know if the behavior that you're going to receive is unpredictable, how do you know? How do you know?
And here's the thing. A lot of the time we are projecting onto everyone else our past experience.
Yes.
And on one hand, it is good to keep that in mind, right?
Right.
Obviously, you don't ignore things that you've experienced that were negative or harmful or scary or would keep you safe to pay attention to those things now. I was talking to a friend of mine, Boyd.
Okay.
Okay, so he's
Hi,
an attorney. Right. I doubt he's watching these, but hi. So this was around the time that Eric and I were planning to go ahead and move forward with the divorce.
Right.
And I was talking to Boyd I don't remember if we were texting or talking on the phone, probably texting. And he kind of called me out about my distrust of men.
Okay.
Now, this is someone who's known me since I was like 13, 14 years old. And he's one of the very few men that I actually trust.
Right.
And was friends with. And this is at that time. There's a whole lot more now because of something he said.
Right.
So he's an attorney, and he is a prosecuting attorney for the county. And he was talking about how he puts together a jury, and he kind of leads into this in a very Socratic, teaching way, right? Because he knew exactly what he was getting ready to say to me. He says, so on a rape case, who do you think I want on that jury?
Men.
You're right.
Men.
That's not what I said.
What'd you say?
I said women. I said I thought I would think that you would want women on that jury. And he goes, actually, no. I want men on that jury. I'm much more likely to get a conviction.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute, why?
Right.
He said, because men want to protect.
Yeah.
And that's what comes out of them, right? As a general rule, right? And he reminded me that most men want to protect. Most men are not out to do harm.
Right.
But
we become, after our experience becomes a repetitive cycle, and I am particularly guilty of this because I have a really bad picker. And I have had a repetitive cycle. Oof, it needs a major alignment, attunement, put it on the rack, whatever it needs it. But I have a really bad habit of choosing poorly in relationships. And after you have gone through such a cycle of this, your vision becomes very narrow of what men are like. And you generalize all men based on these bad experiences that you yourself created because you didn't address your own emotional and psychological needs.
Yeah. Well,
I totally understand Boyd saying that, because the percentage of women who are going to have a much more narrow judgmental view is different than the men who are, as a general rule, wanting to be nurturing and protecting and all of that.
I took that and I thought, okay, you know what? I am on edge and on guard every time I'm around a man. This extended to my internship supervisor, who is the sweetest man ever.
Right.
And so I kind of took that. I'm like, I kind of have to process that for a while, right? So I
Right.
took it out into the world with me and started watching my own reaction
To men.
to men.
Mm-hmm. Just in
And,
general.
you know, I'd be the gas station, one of the least safe places for women after 5 p.m.
Right?
Right? But I'd leave the city that I was doing my work in, and I would be like, oh crap, I forgot to get gas. It's dark. I have to go to the gas station now. So I'd go get gas, and I'd look around.
Mm-hmm.
And the men that were around me, they were just working people.
Right.
Right?
Right.
This guy's getting off of work, filling up his work truck, and going home. This guy's doing that. This guy's doing that. If any one of them had tried anything, the others would have been there.
Right.
To say something, do something, call 911, whatever.
Right.
They're not out to, not all of them are out to get you.
Right.
Right? So that transition to not being on guard and all the time
Mm-hmm.
was so freaking hard.
Yeah.
That was so hard. But I started having to look at it through a different lens.
Mm-hmm.
And not the lens of the past where every man was unkind.
Right.
Once I did, I started seeing the kind men.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I could only see the ones that were going to hurt me.
Right. There's an old saying.
Because the attention was focused there.
If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
That's a piece of finding comfort and security in your feminine.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge, huge hurdle for many, many women.
Right. And it is something that you have to practice early if you expect for him to want to step into your world when he is done with his work.
Right.
When you can nurture that feminine, when you can stay in your feminine, you provide an inviting place for him to take those skills that he learned on the job as a leader of men or as a team builder with other individuals and bring that to you at home.
Yeah.
So there's a divide that we have to watch that we don't create. That we can, by working and nurturing on our feminine while waiting for him to retire, provide an inviting environment for him to step into upon retirement.
One of the things Dennis said to me last night while we were having a conversation about this kind of thing was, we want to find a woman who brings peace to our environment.
Yeah, that is the number one desire I think most men have around home. And I think most women do as well. But it's a big priority for men to have a harmonious work life.
At work,
they're competing.
They're competing. They're not in their peace. It's negotiation. It's competing. It's, making sure things get done, right?
And if they have to come through the door and compete with you, one, they're going to already feel at a deficit. They're already going to feel like they can't compete because you're mommy. The kids may want you more than they want daddy. But they also want to feel competent. So if they're not doing it the way that you're doing it, you are making them feel incompetent by taking it away from them. So all the things that make them successful outside the home are completely negated when they come inside the home. And that's something we can control.
Right. And for women as well, at the end of the day, and you come together, so, maybe he gets a break from the stress and the chaos of the workday, but the women may get a break from having to be the high-powered acquisitions manager like Beth.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
You get a break, you get a chance to relax and be feminine and just who you are rather than, trying to
micromanage
run more
everything.
things at the end of the day.
Right.
It's about coming together and finding the balance and the way that, for those of you who are familiar with the yin yang symbol, it represents opposites, right? And within each side, you've got the white side that has a little black dot and the black side that has a little white dot, right? Which basically symbolizes that there is no light without dark, there is no feminine without masculine, and vice versa.
And you need a little bit of the opposite.
You have some of the
in
opposite.
order to have the balance.
And that goes between, like, within relationships and within yourself, because as Laura so visually displayed for us, you know, we've got that masculine side, but when we operate in our feminine, or when we operate in our masculine all the time, it makes us tired, exhausted, grumpy, sometimes sick.
And it also alienates our partner, our male partner, who wants to fill that space. But if we're busy filling up that space, there's no room for them.
Yeah.
And it's not something that's probably going to change overnight once you recognize it in your relationship. But once you become aware of that's how you're operating, that gives you the information to work with. It gives you a place to start exploring what areas can I start softening in? What areas can I start trying to be more feminine? Now, he may not pick up on it right away.
So that was a thing that Dennis used to say, and I just couldn't wrap my head around. I said, I asked him one time, I'm like, I don't, like, if I'm talking to people about this, like, how do I, because, like, I get it innately now.
Right.
But how do I talk to women about what to do to be more feminine?
Right.
And he would look at me, he goes, doing is a masculine.
Yeah. It's just being.
And I'm like,
that's hard.
What do I do with that?
Right.
He would stop doing. And I'm like, it was so hard to just let
because we have been so deeply ingrained in our own safety, being wrapped up in our own ability to run, to control.
Yeah. When
that is not at all what we are designed to do. And this opens a whole other can of worms of another topic about living in your feminine and acknowledging your masculine. And how do you do that?
If you want a little that was a really clumsy way to say that, preparatory reading.
Yes.
Or I think you can get, some of these are on audiobook, some you may only be able to get in like a paper or digital reading version. Alison Armstrong.
Yes.
And Luann Brizendine. Now, both of these women work in like psychology research type fields, and they have very clear explanations of the masculine, feminine, and the psychology and science behind it. Because I personally had a really hard time accepting the concept.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Until I could see the science behind it.
Okay. My initial reaction
to Alison Armstrong's The Queen's Code.
The Queen's Code.
You will have a visceral reaction.
I had a very strong reaction to this book. And it wasn't until I was able to process that reaction was coming from being so deeply ingrained in my masculine that I realized why my reaction was the way it was.
As you get deeper into your feminine, what do you feel? And I'm not necessarily talking, you know what, I don't want to lead. I just want to ask, what do you feel are you more comfortable? Are you still in the stage of it being challenging?
It's challenging. It's still very challenging. And I have always considered myself a very feminine individual.
And in some ways you incredibly are.
It's different when you look at it from how you're leading your life.
Right.
And how you're showing up in your life. I'm running into difficulty staying in my feminine because right now in this phase of my life, I am partnered with someone who I think feels threatened by it. That may change. My own perception on that may actually change as I work deeper into my feminine. I may have a completely different perception of how he's reacting to what's going on, or I may not see it in a different way, because each level that I go deeper into this, and I was pretty deep into this to begin with, but each level I go deeper and deeper into this, I'm seeing where disconnects in my relationship are based on an imbalance of that dynamic. They're based on a huge imbalance of my ability to be and his ability to do, as well as my ability to trust in his ability to do. There's a big piece of that, because I don't know that I can trust him to be an effective leader. I want him to be, but there's a piece of me that can't let go of having the backup plan. Mm-hmm. There's the piece of me that can't let go of, he's going to drop us on our asses. We're going to be in big shit if I let him have control. If I let him lead.
I like that phrasing better.
Yes, not have control.
It's not
because
about...
that's a problem I see coming from him, is he sees leadership as control. Yeah. And I bristle against that. Yeah. Because I don't want to be controlled. I want to be led.
And I think
there's I think that might be a topic to bring Dennis in on, is how to help a man understand control versus leadership, and what the nuance is there. Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of men are missing the boat. Yeah. On that.
I think so.
But I think that a lot of women, myself included, are getting in our own way because we can't trust the trusting.
And we also can't differentiate between healthy, calm, confident, masculine leadership versus control.
Yes. Yes. Because that is something that wasn't modeled for us either. Yeah. By our fathers and our grandfathers. And so there's a lot of work still left to be done in that department, as far as making it a normal operating procedure versus a foreign concept. Right. Because a lot of women default to masculinity just simply to get shit done. Yep. Because we want it done. Yeah. All right.
I feel all the questions and comments coming.
Please. Bring them. We want to hear it. We want to bounce off ideas. We love playing devil's advocate.
We want to clarify a position if it's not clear.
Yeah, exactly. So. If there are further questions, feel free to hit us up. You can reach us through Collins Counseling. And
Collins Counseling and Coaching.com.
And Coaching.com. So.
For the moment, that is where you will reach out to me to reach Laura as well. We'll get her,
we're working on it.
We'll get her squared away.
Yeah. I'm still, listening to my 8 tracks. So.
I might as well. I'm going to put you up on the website so that you're there
I'll
on
have
my
my
site.
own little window.
So you can, so that it's easier for people to reach out to you.
Okay.
So,
looking forward to hearing from you guys. Yeah. Let us know what you think. Give us your feedback. We're always curious to hear what people have to say. Bye, guys.